I've been through 4 editors so far. Hello.
No, it's all right. I'm recording.
Okay. I've been through 4 editors so far in the National Contest Journal, and still having fun. But it's always hard to find new material for these columns. A lot of my ideas have come from folks like you, putting forth good ideas on contesting. Here's the commercial side of the operation. Anybody who wants to submit to me 800 words or so on some aspect of contesting with a shack shot, I'd be pleased to have it published, and you'll get your name in lights and be famous forever. And everybody will recognize you when you start running in CW contests. So here we go. The object of all of these contests is to make big scores. Here is one of my big scores. The NAQP contest was back in very recent August. I had 447 contacts in 6 hours. So my average rate was 75 contacts per hour. This is on CW, of course, which is my contesting mode. And that's a very good average for me. My average is generally much closer to 60 contacts per hour. So the whole idea of what I'm going to talk about here is to increase your rate. Your rate is the number of contacts per hour that you produce for your score in the contest. You can see what other people are doing and see what your competition is doing. There's a website called 3830, and you'll find that most of us post our scores to 3830 after the contest. Here am I sitting about halfway through my particular category, which is always assisted. Assisted means that I can use the internet to help me find contacts, and it makes a big difference in your rate. You might be amused to see that my chief competition generally is Doug V3MV, and in this competition, I was some 72 contacts ahead of him at the end of the contest. We often run very close scores together. My other competition is Stan V3TW, and Stan and I seem to alternate back and forth as to who has the higher score. So it's a lot of fun to see who has done what in the contest that you've been operating in. So you're not alone out there. Here is my list of contests worked just in the NAQP, the national, I can't remember what it stands for. The NAQP, anyway. And I've done it since 2015. A few of the phone contests, but mostly CW. I save all of my logs so I can compare my own scores. And I really compete against myself, which is the only logical way of doing it. So John V3EJ sitting out there in the Niagara Peninsula, he's not too worried about me because I'm not really trying to compete with him. And if he has a bigger score than I do, well, we operate under two extremely different frames of reference. But I compete against myself. My antennas don't change from year to year. My power doesn't change from year to year, but my tactics change drastically. And that makes quite a difference. Here we go. The theme of this presentation, as far as I'm concerned, is increasing your contact rate, your number of contacts per hour. And the whole idea of this is to maintain as high a rate as you possibly can. So let's look first at what compromises your rate, going all the way back to the historical aspects of contesting. We used to start out with a separate receiver and transmitter. We used to enter call signs and other data by hand. We used to do the logbook by hand. We used to tune the receiver by hand, and we still do. Some of these tactics are still viable. We have to keep track of duplicate contacts, and we used to do that by having a check sheet on paper in front of us and noting down contacts as we made them, and then trying to avoid duplicates. Spotting new multipliers in contests that use multipliers is always very important. It's not the number of contacts that you make in a contest, it's the number of multipliers. That's what boosts your score. And these days, using the internet, there are some neat ways of doing that. And then if you want to change bands, or sometimes even move within a band, you have to retune your transmitter. And of course, hopefully those days are over. So here's one of those old-time contesting stations. This one happens to be working phone, but you can see the Vibroplex bug here. This was a Vibroplex Champion. It was actually my first bug. And because I didn't know that there were left-handed bugs, I use a right-handed bug with my left hand. And it does work. And I did that for some years. Somewhere back in this conversation, we talked about looking at pictures and reading magazine articles. And it was a magazine article in QST that I read years after I began working CW. And a quote from that article said, "So I thumbed a fast 5. And I picked up my hand and I said, he thumbed a fast 5. He used his thumb to send a 5, did. But I used my fingers for that. And that's when I realized I was using my bug backwards. But it was far too late to switch by that time. So here's my setup back in the late 50s. Separate receiver and transmitter, DX35 Heathkit, and a VFO unit. And now you want to picture this when I want to call a station that I have heard on the receiver. I first have to move the transmitter to the receiver's frequency. So I have to turn on the VFO, and I have to move the receiver of the VFO dial until you can hear it in the receiver. That's called zero beating. Then the transmitter and the receiver are on the same frequency, and then I can call the station. Let's just go back to my page here. Separate receiver and transmitter VFO. You can understand how that would slow down your rate considerably. Okay. Onwards and upwards. Increasing your contact rate. How do you increase your contact rate per hour? Well, first of all, you have to get rid of this zero beating the VFO situation. So you add a transceive capability. That means that the receiver and the transmitter are on the same frequency all the time. The transmitter automatically follows the receiver's frequency, and then you don't have to zero beat. That increases your rate considerably. Here's a transceive capability from the early 70s. These are the Drake twins of great name. I think this was the receiver. That was the transmitter. They look very similar. And as you tune the receiver, the transmitter follows it. You still have to retune the transmitter if you change bands. So we haven't lost that delay in the operation. However, not having to bring the transmitter up to the receiver's frequency was a great improvement in contesting. Okay, what's the next step that we can picture? We can add a band scope. For those of you who have not yet discovered the delights of a band scope is a television set. It looks something like this. This is the Elecraft P3. And by this time, this is about 14, 15, 16 years ago, I have one of the Elecraft K3 transceivers. And I subsequently got the band scope. The band scope lets you look at a portion of the band visually. So it looks like that. Here's the screen of the P3. It's looking from 7030 to 7080. So a 50 kilohertz portion of the band. And I can expand that or subtract from it, if you will, as I wish. The spikes represent stations on the air, in this case, in a contest. So when you're tuning your band, when you're tuning your receiver, looking for new contacts, you no longer have to tune through all of this dead air between this station and that station. You don't know that there's nobody there. So you have to tune that section of the band. That takes time. With the band scope, you can just pop the receiver quickly from here to there because you can see that there are no stations operating in that area. So there's another empty space. Here's another one here, and so forth and so on. You can see that tuning the band for new contacts, and this is a search and pounce technique, excuse me, makes a big difference in your rate because you're not wasting time tuning dead air. The other advantage of the band scope is that when you decide you're going to go and run stations, you're going to sit on a frequency, call CQ, and let the world come to you. This shows you where the empty spots are, where you can call CQ without somebody QRMing you. So when I'm looking for some place to run on a very busy band, I go to the band scope and I look for these empty spots. And I'll choose one of these empty spots for my transmitter to sit down on so that when I call CQ, I'm on an empty frequency and everybody can hear me. Let's just go back and review a little bit. Again, this is what it looks like at the time. And if you add the band scope, now you're tuning the receiver by hand for new contacts, which is a search and pounce technique. And the band scope lets you tune from spike to. Okay, here we go. Now, where are we from here? Well, you've got all of these hardware additions to your shack. It's time to add some software. You'll see in a lot of the columns that I write for the National Contest Journal, I say that if you're not using a computer in a contest, you're having fun, but you're not competing. You cannot compete with stations that are using a computer for assistance in so many different areas of contesting. So to increase your contact per hour rate, you have to add computer contesting software. The most popular program these days is N1MM Plus, which is free. It's very complex. It takes a while to learn how to use it. It has an amazing amount of facilities that are very useful even to the beginning operator. Here am I in a cottage up on the Rideau Waterway area. I used to rent this cottage for a couple of weeks in August so I could operate that NAQP contest. And this is my laptop running N1MM software. One of the things you want to pay attention to is that if you're going to start running computer software, logging software for contesting, you want to use the same software that everybody else is using, because you will run into trouble in configuring and operating with this software. And where do you go to find help? You go to the nearest other contesting ham, because we're all using pretty much the same software. And almost everybody is an expert in some aspect of this software. So it's not very difficult to find help. And I have 2 or 3 contesting buddies just around Toronto. When I get into trouble, I call one of them up and I yell help, and I'm generally back in business in about 5 minutes. This is a typical screen for the N1MM Plus contesting software. This is your data entry screen where you put in your call sign, you copy the name of, in this particular contest, and a serial number, but the computer will often put that information in there for you, depending on how you've got the contesting software set up so that when you click on a call sign, and there's the call sign there, it will automatically put in the necessary information. So all you really have to do when you're chasing a station is keep pressing the enter button. And in this particular software, it's a phrase that says enter sends message, ESM, very, very quick data entry. And of course, quick means fast, fast rate, high rate. Here's your rate meter here. It's not filled out at the moment, but you'll find that when you're contesting, these numbers go up and down as you contest, and it will give you a dynamic picture of what your rate is at that moment. When I'm doing this kind of technique with the computer, it's not unusual for me to approach a 200 contact per hour rate. Doesn't last very long because I run out of stations to talk to. But that's how fast you can work stations if there's enough target for you to chase. One of the most useful aspects of this software is called the band map. This is put onto from the internet. And there are ramifications here that if you've not used it before, you don't realize. First of all, it will only post stations that you haven't worked yet. So all of your duplicate stations are not shown. If they're shown, they're in a different color and the software bypasses them. When you want to go up and down this band map, there are a number of ways of doing it. And you can use a mouse, which is slow. You can use your receiver, which is slower still. But you can do it with a couple of key presses. Control plus up down is generally what we use. And you can go up and down that band map very, very quickly. So your search and pounce techniques become extremely quick. And that's how you build up this rate, this fast rate when you're doing search and pounce. I've come to the point where my average rate in search and pounce is faster than my average rate in running. And that, I think, is a little bit unusual. And it's only because this technique is so fast. But if you click on one of these stations, one of these call signs with your mouse, for example, it doesn't matter what band you're on, the transceiver will change bands, change antennas, retune itself, and put you on that frequency ready to work that station. This is Star Wars contesting, and it's just amazing. I actually have two data entry screens here because I often use a technique called single operator 2VFO. And this, in effect, allows me to run on one frequency, on one band, with one antenna, while I'm doing search and pounce using the band map on another band with another mode using another antenna. And this fills in the holes when the band gets quiet, when you run out of stations to talk to, and you start to twiddle your thumbs trying to stay awake and maintain interest. This will increase your rate considerably because now you're both running and doing search and pounce simultaneously. And I'll talk about this some more when we do some more discussion on N1MM in a future session. It also keeps track of your contacts on each band and your score. Here's your logbook up here. It also keeps track of your logbook, and it prevents you from having duplicate contacts. It's very difficult when you're using N1MM to make a duplicate contact. You have to really work hard at it. I have managed to do it on a few occasions, but I really had to work hard at it. Okay, little closer look at N1MM. using a slightly different color scheme. Again, this is my logbook. This is my information screen. There's my rate presently. I'm running 60 contacts an hour at this point. And there's my data entry screen. And I'm presently working AB9CA. And AB9CA is shown on the band map right here. And I found him by going Control up, down, and I stopped because I heard this loud signal, whereupon the software began to put the information in my data entry screen for me. Very, very fast. This is called the assisted mode of operation. And if you use the internet to full advantage, you'll find that your scores will skyrocket. Just to give you an example of the difference, one of my favorite contests is the CWT, which is promoted by the CW Ops organization. And the three that I work are all 1 hour sessions interspersed through Wednesday from the morning to the late evening, and one in the middle. My favorite contest, it only runs for an hour. So any changes that you make in tactics will show up immediately in your rate. You can tell right away if that's the wrong tactic or a good tactic. When your rate starts to go down here, you have to decide, am I going to change bands? Am I going to switch from the search and pounce to running and back again? These are decisions that you can make. Am I going to go to a much higher band or a much lower band, chase the maximum usable frequency, or stop off somewhere else and see if that band is open? But the rate meter will tell you when to change tactics. It's very, very critical that you pay attention to this in the CWT. When I began working the CWT, and I think it was 5 or 6 years ago, I used to aim for a score of 60 contacts in the hour. If I achieved 60 contacts in the hour, I felt I was doing very good, very well. And I sometimes didn't make that particular score. This, of course, is going back to the Sunspot minimum days of the late 20s. And so conditions weren't always very good. But as the bands have opened up and participation has increased and my tactics have improved, but not my power and not my antenna, my average score in this contest has gone from 60 contacts in the hour to very close to 100. And my personal best so far is 117. And I attribute this mostly to better tactics and better conditions and more participation. One of the features of N1MM is a multiplier screen. Remember, I said that in certain contests, multipliers make a big difference in your score, particularly the WPX, the CQWPX contest, where multipliers really are the critical part of the score. When you're chasing multipliers, you're on your way to a much higher score than if you're just letting them come to you in a casual way. N1MM provides this facility for you for chasing multipliers. The red ones are ones that you have not worked yet, and the blue ones are ones that have already been worked. And the blanks are multipliers that have not been posted, which means that the system has not heard a station in that particular multiplier at that time. Now, here's where Star Wars contesting comes into its own. At times through the contest, I will bring up the screen and I will go through the entire multiplier screen. I'll just double click on each of those squares. And at that time, the transceiver will change bands. It'll retune itself, if you can picture that. It will put the right antenna on the transceiver. It will change modes if it must. And it's ready to chase that station. And it will call that station. So all I have to do is double click on that square and my transceiver will call that station on that band, on that mode, with the right antenna. Friends, this is Star Wars. This is amazing stuff. And it's very exciting to see it happen. In contests like the sweepstakes, when I started using this screen in the last 2 sweepstakes contests, I've had a clean sweep. In both of those contests, I've worked every available multiplier. And up to that time, I've always missed 1 or 2. I've always missed 1 or 2. From here, what else can you do? You can put up bigger antennas. You can upgrade to a modern SDR transceiver with a built-in band scope, and it's a very quiet receiver. And you can use an auto tuner to cover all ranges of the antenna impedance that you're working with. So here's my present contesting station, or one of the 2. Excuse me. This is the clean sweep mug, by the way, that I lusted after, probably since about 1960, when I started working the sweepstakes contest. You get this only if you've worked every multiplier available in the sweepstakes contest. This was my first one last year. My second one seems to have gone missing somewhere in Canada Post. This is the ICOM 7610 transceiver, which has 2 receivers in it. So I can operate 2 bands simultaneously. One can be on sideband, one can be on CW. 2 separate antenna inputs. I have a auto tuner here from LDG, which will handle easily the power of the transceiver. And it has a much wider impedance matching range than the built-in automatic antenna tuner that Mr. ICOM provides. I'm using a very large monitor here. This is the N1MM software laid out, as you can see. And I'll just make a comment or 2 about keeping your shack comfortable. Use the biggest keyboard you can find and the highest quality, because it reduces your typing errors. It increases your typing speed. And the idea is to have it sitting just about above your knees. So I've got a cutout here in my desk. And for contesting, I take off the blocking piece of wood that sits here. And I have this keyboard available. I have a contest cushion, which I put on my very comfortable chair. And that keeps me in the chair longer. You can see a speaker here, but I don't use speakers in contesting. I only use headphones, and I have a pair of very good headphones. Use the best that you can find, the most comfortable, because those 2 will keep you in the chair as long as you can. I think I've pretty well covered everything I wanted to say. So as they say, we'll bring the chair open for questions. How do I get out of here? That did it. Now, how do I get back to
Stop sharing.
what I want?
Stop sharing.
Stop sharing. That'll do it. But first I have to get back to the main screen. Whoops. How do I get back to the main screen? Okay, help me here, Tony. How do I fill the screen up with all of these